Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of Board Games I've Got Rid Of and Why. So this is a series of videos where I talk about board games that I've previously owned, but for one reason or another I no longer own. And of course I will get into those reasons for the decision of kicking them out of my collection. And because sometimes it's not as bad as it sounds. And before I get into the games, I just want to give a shout out to kienda.co.uk, which is my go-to website or board game website in the UK, where you can get great games at great prices. And you can even use my discount code Kienda5 to get a discount of £5 off at the checkout on deliveries £40 plus. But let's get into the games. So the first game I'm going to talk about on this episode is a game called Venice. So Venice was a game I was actually really looking forward to. This is a David Terzi and I believe it was Andrei Novak co-design. This one is a kind of a pick up and deliver engine building, kind of a route building style game, as you are basically traveling down these canals and trying to pick up different resources and drop them off somewhere else. You can invest in these buildings where if you drive past them or sail past them, then you're going to get a certain bonus. And there was, it really did have a lot of ingredients of a game that I usually tend to enjoy, so that's probably why I was so excited to try it. And I will say this game was not a bad game, but it was just missing something, and I think I can put my finger on what it was missing. So first off, production standpoint, so bare basics, this game did have some pretty bad production issues, and the board was nowhere near as big as it needed to be. As if certain people or more than one player were at a certain point on the board, then it became extremely congested and just it wasn't fit for purpose. Additionally, you'd have to place meeples on certain spots which would cover up vital iconography, and it just had, gameplay-wise, it also had some issues in terms of it had this mechanism where if you accumulated or acquired this I think it was like an intrigue or some kind of corruption throughout the game, which you normally get, if you have a certain amount of corruption at the end of the game, if you have the most, then you are disqualified from winning. This game had that mechanism, but it just didn't quite resonate as well as I would like it to. And all these different problems, as well as some fiddliness and some confusion when you ended up mapping out your turn, it just became a bit of a problem, and it also took a little bit too long. So sad to say this was a bit of a near miss, and I would like to see maybe an improved second edition for this one. But yeah, unfortunately I couldn't keep it for those reasons. The second game I'm going to talk about is Genoa. So Genoa is actually an earlier Rudiger Dorn game, so if you are a regular viewer of my content, Rudiger Dorn is generally a designer who I sing from the rooftops about. I love pretty much 90-95% of his games. Genoa, a bit like Venice, was another near miss from me. So this one actually used the famous Istanbul mechanism where you had a stack of merchants and you travel from kind of square to square, dropping a disc off along the way. However, this one threw that concept on its head, where it would become a competitive negotiation style game, where on a player's turn, you would actually drop these discs off, trying to visit these different resource areas or these conversion spots to convert resources into points. And the way you'd do that would be, you kind of have a free reign for the other players to interact with you and say, if you come this way and visit this merchant, I'll give you X amount of money, and so on. So I really like that idea. I love that core concept, but this is one of those games where while the concept and idea of it sounds great, in practice it didn't quite work the way I would like it to. It dragged on quite a bit longer than I would have liked. This is quite a lengthy game. And I just thought this one just held back a bit too much. I would have liked to see a bit, more spots to go to, have a bit more open board where maybe you could even convince the player to visit several spots on your behalf, because I think you were capped at only being able to use a certain spot once on another player's turn, which it had its limits. And it was so close. I wanted this one to be brilliant, but it wasn't, unfortunately. And this one I think has maybe been a bit of a victim to the test of time, so it hasn't aged as well as I would have liked it to. But a bit like Venice as well, I really would like to see a re-implemented version of this, a new, fresh, clean version ready for this era of board gaming. But a near miss, that is Genoa. The next game I have Whale Riders, which is a relatively recent Rainer Knizia design. This one pretty simple in its design, as you are just travelling from point A to point B, and along the way you're collecting resources and then trying to convert them in for points. It's a very simple contract fulfillment game with a point-to-point movement system where do you want to jump further ahead? and beat people to it, or do you want to go slower and potentially collect more along the way, but you're affecting stuff as you're going? So very simple, family-friendly design, absolutely stellar production and artwork. I think this was illustrated by Vincent Dutrait, and probably one of the most gorgeous games I've played in quite a while, actually. But the gameplay itself, it was more catered to a family audience. It really didn't have its own identity. There was a lot of games out there that are very similar to this one, but which was a bit of a shame because I would love to see that artwork used in a better game design. But no issues with it at all. It just wasn't very inspiring. That is Whale Riders. Next game I'm going to talk about is Brutal Kingdom. So this is a game I actually did dislike quite a bit. So this is a Michael Renick design, who's generally a designer I don't mind. I generally like his games. This one was a big miss for me though. So this is a kind of a role selection drafting game as you're collecting these different characters with unique abilities on them. And then you'd use them to collect points and do different things to interact with the game state. And I did like the scoring system in this game where you would have a communal pool of points as well as the points you collect and they'd multiply with one another. So if you had, say, like 5 tokens personally and maybe there's 3 in the centre, you'd get 5 times 3 for 15 points. But the more you collect, you would start to water that down. So it was a kind of a balancing act on the way you scored, which I thought was really cool. But I thought all the roles in this game were just way too circumstantial. Some were clearly better than others. Most of the time they just didn't trigger at all. And it was just a bit of a boring, just not very well designed game in my opinion. Just can't really see where the fun would be extracted from this one. So a bit like Whale Riders as well, this one had lovely artwork, some of the best kind of anthropomorphic animal artwork that I've seen, but gameplay was certainly lackluster and I would not recommend Brutal Kingdom. Next up, I have Trois Dice. Now, ironically, this is probably a game that I like most or more than a lot of people who played this game. So it's not a very well received game, maybe because it lives in the shadow of its bigger grandfather game, Trois. This is the roll and write version of the game. As you would have this, where you roll a bunch of dice and then you would use those dice to obviously tick things off on your player sheet. But I did like this element that the game would fight against you, where every now and then, or every round, a certain box would be destroyed, meaning that you could no longer kind of go for those points anymore, but you could actually go to another spot and protect them from that happening. So I actually thought this was pretty well-rounded, and a quality roll and write game. Again, I'm in the minority there. Most people didn't like this game. But I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't much variability here. You're pretty much playing the same game every single time. You can pretty much follow the same paths. But despite that, I thought it was a solid one. And if you do like roll and write games, this is one of the better ones, I think, anyway. But again, I'm in the minority there. Next up, a big game. This one I'm a bit sad to talk about. This is actually Ra. So Ra, a kind of a classic Reiner Knizia auction style game, as you are using tiles or these bidding tiles in order to acquire these other tiles which will score in lots of different ways, just set collection bonuses or not having the least of something. It had a really cool element of push your luck where you could just wait and hope for this row to fill up, but as soon as a Ra token would be drawn, or then you would actually wipe the whole board off and basically waste your turn, or it would actually start the auction, which could mean that you could lose out. But I did like the way this game works. I think it's a really fun, I think it's a pretty classic game. I'd happily play this anytime, but unfortunately most of the people I played this with didn't like it half as much as I did. So obviously I'm not going to play games or force people to play games that they're not so keen on just because I like them. So, and I'm not too worried because I have so many other auction games in my collection. It's one of my favourite genres. I'll always have something to go to, and I just couldn't warrant having Ra in my collection is taking up space when I just know in the back of my mind that the other people aren't enjoying it as much as I do. So that is Ra, unfortunately had to go. Next up, I have NumberNine. So NumberNine is actually a pretty interesting tile placement game, very puzzly game, as you're laying the foundation of this of these tiles down, and you're made up of all these different numbers, and they'll fit in together in weird and wonderful ways. And then you're basically building new tiles on top of those. So it's a 3D puzzle, and you're trying to kind of abide by certain restrictions, but the higher the number, or the number is multiplied by the level you put it on. So you want to get these high numbers on as high level as possible, but normally the higher numbers have a bigger base value so that you can actually place them as easily as the lower numbers. Really clever design. I think this is a nice filler. You can get it played in under half an hour. Certainly very accessible, family-friendly style game. And I would like it. And I probably would have this in my collection still if it wasn't for another game just downright replacing it for me. That was Miyabi by Michael Kiesling. I thought that game just does everything better than NumberNine does. Another kind of 3D element game when you're placing tiles upon tiles and scoring bigger multipliers. So, and that one had so much more to offer. So unfortunately, it was a direct replacement for me, but that's not a slight on NumberNine. I still think it's a good game. Next up, I have Heaven and Ale. So Heaven and Ale, talking of Michael Kiesling, this is a rondel style game and a tile placement game. As you're collecting tiles, and you can place these tiles on either side of your board, and you've got like the shade area and the sun area. One is going to give you money, and one is going to give you victory points. And the scoring system in this game was a bit obtuse, a bit weird. But I like this time track system where you can travel as far as you want, but you can never go back on yourself. It's generally a mechanism that's done well, and this is one of the best examples of that mechanism being used well. This is a bit of a strange one because I can't really rationalise so well why this one did go from the collection. I think this one was just slipped further and further down on the pecking order of what I wanted to play at any time. So it was sat on my shelf for quite a long time, just not getting played, probably not getting played anytime soon. As I was getting more games I enjoyed more, and when I do have that rare occasion to go back and play older games, then I'll probably lean towards something else. So it was just a matter of not getting played. But if you'd put this out in front of me and say, we're playing Heaven and Ale today, I will happily do that. So unfortunately, a strong game that still holds my shield of quality, but not one that I'm going to have in my personal collection any longer. Next up, I have RedSeven. This is a pretty weird card-driven game by Carl Chudik. This one, you are basically trying to, on your turn, you have to be in a position where you're not losing. And to do that, you're either going to play cards in front of you, or you're going to play them in the centre of the table. And that's going to change the rules. So one might say, have the most cards of a certain colour, or have the highest number, or something like that. So you can either play a card in front of you to be the leader, or change the rule that you're the leader, or even do both. And it really is a game of attrition, trying to manage your hand as carefully as you can in order to stay in as long as you can. You can string these moves together to try and get more mileage out of your cards. It works pretty well. I think it's a good one. This one was really on the brink of being great. It's good, it's not great, it just has its limits really. And I think this was another victim of being, in a pool of so many great games in the same kind of space and time frame this one takes. So you can get this one played in 20 minutes or so. But again, you can get a lot of other amazing games like this, filler games, done in that time frame as well. So slipped further and further down the pecking order, wasn't getting played. Capacity in my room, my games room is limited. So unfortunately, it had to go. And the final game I'm going to talk about is Legendary, a Marvel deck building game. So this was actually probably the game that got me hooked on the board gaming hobby in general. This is a deck building game, obviously based on the Marvel Comics universe. And this one is, despite me not being the biggest fan, or I'm not the biggest sucker of deck building games, generally is something I tend to shy away from. But a big part of that was because Legendary was always my go-to deck builder. I love the way this game works, as you're building basically a team of superheroes into this big randomized deck. You're fighting a mastermind with a unique scheme that he's trying to fulfill, and they're all wildly different. There's massive scope and spectrum of different objectives you can go to and try and stop. And different henchmen and different bad guys supporting that mastermind. So the variability in this game is downright outstanding. They're never going to play the same game twice with this one because there is so much variability, purely based on the amount of expansions released for this one. And that was kind of a double-edged sword for this one, because this game did quickly become very bloated. The setup time wasn't the easiest as it was, because there was so much variability, so much shuffling cards and stuff. And with more and more material coming out for it, it just became a massive obstacle to get this one to the table. It became a point where I had just an absolute, a Calyx cube full of Legendary stuff, and I just didn't want to look at it because I just couldn't even stomach getting it out onto the table, because it was just that much of a pain. But the game itself is still really good. You get some great combos and stuff. And I just think as time's gone by, maybe my enjoyment of the Marvel Comics has dwindled somewhat as well. And I always grew up loving Marvel Comics, but as it's becoming more and more corporate, a bit more PC, it gets a bit, it just rubs me the wrong way a bit. But It's a good game. If you like deck builders, then I would recommend it. But unfortunately, it's not going to be a game I'm going to reach out and play anymore. And I'd rather play a more self-contained, succinct game like one of these to my right here. So yeah, that's the reason I got rid of Legendary. So that concludes this installment of games I've got rid of and why. I hope you've enjoyed it. And hopefully that you've got some kind of use and you found it useful and could maybe steer you towards or away from these games that you might have been interested in. But if you have enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. Additionally, you can support me on Patreon by visiting patreon.co.uk/chairman of the board to keep the channel going. And of course, visit kienda.co.uk if you're in the UK and you like board games. But for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.